This is the SVG-TV News and Sports. I'm Carol Cato, and these are the details. The Division of Technical and Vocational Education of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Community College is said to be charting the course forward for renewable energy here. On Tuesday, the division opened its Renewable Energy Lab, which will be a teaching project for students and will be in a better position will better position the division to offer energy education to the wider Vincentian public. The lab cost an estimated $105,000 EC dollars. Dean of the Division of Technical and Vocational Education, Osborne Bowens, says they are extremely happy with the project, considering its potential impact on the country, particularly as it relates to the ongoing discussion for cheaper energy. He says the opening of the Renewable Energy Lab is demonstrative of three of the objectives of the division.
One, as we plan to re-image TVET to maximize its contribution to the socio-cultural and socio-economic development of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Additionally, this project would help us to plan in diversifying our offerings consistent with the changing technological and humanistic demands of a developing society. And more importantly, to collaborate with government and industry as they set a policy agenda. We wish to give informed guidance based on empirical data that would allow government and industry to make the best decisions and avoid wastage of scarce resources, senseless duplication of efforts, with minimal negative impact on our environment.
Bowens further states that the continuing diversification of the services offered at the division is part of efforts to re-image technical vocational education in SVG.
Basically, the TVET person was to work with his hand and not his head. Latest research, however, now shows that advances in science and technology, the TVET graduate is as much a scientific thinker and a scientist as the quote-unquote academic. Today's opening of our Renewable Energy Lab, our photovoltaic lab, is the first step in making an impact and keeping our finger on the pulse as far as the discussion of renewable energy is concerned in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We are aware of the critical role that cheaper and more environmentally friendly forms of energy would have to play in the socio-economic landscape of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, both at the macro and the micro levels.
According to Bowens, in the current environment, there is a lot of talk on hydro, geothermal and solar energy, and the Division of Technical, Vocational and Vocational Education is positioning itself to civilize the discussion with practical and reasonable expectations as they work along with all stakeholders. Meanwhile, head of the engineering department at the division, Kenroy Kittels, points out that at present, the Renewable Energy Lab is more advanced than when it first started the project in 2010. Noting that at the time, it was lacking in physical facilities for the students to work.
We have a system now that incorporates the standalone system. So we now put up our shed outside where students can install PV panels. We have our battery storage area. We have monitoring facilities. And what heartens me most is that I can walk around the compound and I can check into the system wirelessly. And that was one of the things that plagued us, monitoring the system. We also have the system being the net metering issue. So right now we have 3 meters in the lab, which the students can see the generated capacity, what is generated. They can also see what is being used, and they can see the meter actually reversing and say, well, oh, that's what happened. So at this time, it is very interesting to the student, and even lecturers are becoming on board with the whole issue of renewable energy.
Representative of the Energy Unit in the Office of the Prime Minister, Chaz Williams, says the establishment of the Renewable Energy Lab at the Division of Technical and Vocational Education complements the work they've been doing at the unit to reduce the country's reliance on fossil fuel.
Programs like these help to strengthen the awareness of renewable energy technologies and benefits in our country. The Energy Unit fully supports this project and pledges our assistance in any future endeavors.
To become an outstanding entrepreneur, the aggregation of skills and competencies mixed with the penetration of external markets should be considered. That's the advice given by Governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, the ECCB, Sir Dwight Venner, speaking at a video conference at the 2013 Financial Information Month Business Symposium yesterday. The symposium was held under the theme, Identifying Solutions to Address Business Challenges in the OECS within the construct of a global economy.
So that with respect to external markets, the markets we have here in each individual island and throughout OECS are too small to accommodate large growth. And so therefore we have to be brave enough to venture out in the rest of the Caribbean and further than that to ensure that we can make an impact and own the foreign exchange which can provide for a better standard of living and quality of life. The aggregation of skills and competencies involves the organization and representation of the private sector by specialization. Firms in various sectors can organize themselves into cooperatives to secure economies of scale. These firms can become members of, say, the Agricultural Association, would promote their interests. The Agricultural Association can become a part of the National Association, in which the Tourist Association, the Manufacturers Association, and other sectors of the business community are represented.
Over 200 business executives and senior managers, business owners, entrepreneurs, and officers from educational institutions across the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, the ECCU, took part in the symposium via video conferencing. This country's senior magistrate, Rishan Brown Mathias, has promised to visit the exhibit room at the Criminal Investigations Department. She made this promise on Tuesday when the court prosecution appealed for a short adjournment to have an exhibit present in court to be produced as evidence. The prosecutor told the court that the reason for the absence of the exhibit was as a result of the assignment of a new exhibit keeper. He said that the previous exhibit keeper had retired and that the present one was trying to familiarize himself with the exhibits. However, defense counsel Israel Bruce, who was representing the accused, lashed out at the prosecution, stating that if exhibits are properly labeled, they should be easily located by any exhibit keeper. At a recent sitting of the Kingstown Magistrates Court, the senior magistrate had threatened to dismiss several cases due to the absence of exhibits. CARICOM countries have done little to drum up support for the declaration of the Decade of African Descendants this year, says UWI professor. We have more stories on the local scene when the evening news continues. Welcome back to the evening news. Still on the local scene, very little has been done by CARICOM countries to drum up support for the Decade of African Descents to be declared this year. That's according to Professor Vereen Shepherd, chair of the Jamaica Reparations Committee, delivering the University of the West Indies Open Campus Annual Independence Lecture last evening on the topic, The Decade, CARICOM and the Decade for People of African Descent, a Post-Colonial Imperative. Professor Shepherd outlined that while CARICOM countries continue to push for the United Nations to declare this as the Decade of the African Descendants, little awareness about the decade exists in the region.
Conscious that CARICOM states are member states of the United Nations, and they are encouraged to act on international days, international years, international decades, and also to try to propose them. And CARICOM has an active voice in the United Nations, and CARICOM has signed on to so many protocols and agreements. And I think we should be conscious of the movement to get this decade declared.
Professor Shepherd says though some may question why the focus on people of African descent, it should be a foregone conclusion, as the people of African descent form the majority of the Caribbean population.
Yet racism and structural and institutional discrimination against them, rooted in the infamous regime of slavery, the transatlantic trade in enslaved Africans and colonialism, and reinforced by the context of globalization, are often evident in the situations of inequality, marginalization, and stigmatization affecting them. It is right that we talk about these issues, despite our tendency to sweep them under the carpet. Indeed, in our anxiety to maintain our ideal of multiracial and multicultural Caribbean societies, we often make the culture and values of minorities those of the majority, thereby fostering unnecessary inter-ethnic discord.
The appeal by Prime Minister Dr. Ralph Gonsalves for reparations from some European countries for slave and native genocide is said to be garnering attention from some high-profile members of the civil rights and activist community. According to a media release by Ambassador Lacelia Prince, the recent feature address by PM Gonsalves to the Institute for the Black World 21st Century in Washington, D.C. was attended by prominent activist James Early, who, in congratulating Dr. Gonsalves, expressed interest in bringing in some of his strategic partners to work with the government of SVG on matters pertaining to African descendants. This is said to have resulted in a visit to the Vincentian Embassy by Early, accompanied by fellow activist, actor, and diplomat Danny Glover. The release states that while acknowledging that their work has not focused on reparations for slavery, both Early and Glover indicated that they readily see room for their collaboration with the government of SVG on dealing broadly with many of the fundamental problems that confront Afro-descendants. Both men reportedly expressed interest in visiting SVG, and it was pointed out to them by Ambassador Prince that PM Gonsalves' chairmanship of CARICOM from January to June 2014 could be an opportune time in which they can advance their partnership with his government. Over 50 companies here are expected to participate in the second Vincy trade fair scheduled to open tomorrow. That should be on Friday. One of the coordinators of the fair, Nicola Brown, says its purpose is to showcase local products and services.
These include from the manufacturing sector, construction, hospitality, engineering, just to name a few of the sectors. But if you want the specifics, we'll be talking about manufacturing companies making books. We're talking about companies like East Caribbean Metals, Line of Course, Vitamol, companies displaying other beverages. So we're talking about a wide range and a wide mix of companies that you'll see at the trade fair.
Brown says another objective is to forge innovation in SVG and encourages Vincentians to support the fair, which will be mounted for the entire weekend at the Geest Shed.
It is a no-brainer that we're in worldwide recession, things are slow, and the theme of the trade fair is forging ahead with innovation for a better nation. So we're looking at it as a means of propelling the country, getting people to see what's out there, getting persons to boost the economy by spending more, because as it is said, knowledge is power. So once they know what's available to them and what their options are, then they'll be able to purchase. And that we see would be essential in making the economy stronger and better.
The trade fair opens on Friday morning at 10 a.m.